Hi there. Thanks for joining us. This talk really is going to look at how we might reimagine, repurpose risk communication to try to get the direct engagement of those communities, those people who are actually going to be most adversely affected by natural threats. And I'm going to use the example of Istanbul to talk through the strategy. The background is the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which has made it very clear that we need to move to a much more a broader and a more people-centered approach to actually actively bring in those people who are going to be threatened into the process of managing and evaluating and preparing for risk. And that's a big challenge. That's a big departure to the way we've normally done it. And what I'd like to do in this talk is to outline a few of the myths that we need to break down in order to do that. And the first one is the myth that actually all it is about communicating what we know better, that it's about information and that information will automatically lead to action. And lots of empirical studies have demonstrated that's not the case. Risky situations are time poor. There's generally lots and lots of data swirling around. There's large amounts of uncertainty in that data. And also there's lots of fear and emotion amongst the people that are affected. And in that context, what we find is that people make decisions based on their values and beliefs. They go with their gut instinct, their kind of fast thinking mode in order to make those decisions. And they recognize that. So they then look to confirm or to affirm those values and beliefs by seeking out information that agrees with them. And they'll reject any information that they encounter that goes against their fundamental values and beliefs. So that kind of anchors in that viewpoint. And the reason that they do that is because they go to people that they trust, people who echo, who mirror their own values. And that isn't necessarily, in fact, is often not technical experts and scientists and academic professors. So the result is that opinions aren't formed by logic and facts, aren't influenced by logical factual arguments. And that presents a problem for us because the technical experts often converse and communicate in logical, technical, factual arguments. And in that individual cognitive decision-making process happens in the context of a wider ecosystem of decision-making that is within the social networks, within an organization, within the community, and within the wider society. So the risk decisions, the risk-making decisions by the publics, a really complicated landscape that we need to negotiate. And one way that we can communicate through that is really embedding facts into stories. So creating compelling narratives that tell the story of what we want to convey, and in doing so, conveys some of the facts. So those two people in that street in Istanbul there are telling stories. They're telling stories, and we're essentially storyteller. And so we need to try and embrace that as risk communicators. The second myth really is that there is no such thing as the public or the community. We think of it as this big lump, but actually it's a heterogeneous, fragmented, contested group of publics. And it's very important that we think about who is it amongst that we want to reach, because each of those individual sub-publics require different types of communications. That means that we need social scientists like Sibel and Max to help us break down those groups, to break down who are the key stakeholders and what are they interested in, how do we reach them. One way that we can do that, as shown on the bottom left, is by actually embedding ourselves, going into the communities that we're talking about. So this is a field trip that we ran. That's a group of seismologists and social scientists and engineers going around Fikirtepe that's actually interested in trying to think about what that community is like and who lives there. And that then can shape, on the right-hand side, how we then start to cultivate our communications, how we learn to communicate very precisely for individual groups, working with media professionals. On the left, there's Lisa Robinson, disaster risk reduction media professionals, talking to ESSA really about maybe some of the ways that we can communicate much more effectively. The other thing is the myth that what we need is some clever products, some really interesting, engaging kind of materials in order to communicate. And what we find with the internet and with social media is lots of opportunities to communicate in very different ways to what we've done traditionally. So YouTube, for example, we can create really quite sophisticated movies, films, short films about, in this case, how an earthquake works, or on the bottom there, animated films for looking at seismic risk for a much younger audience to try and reach. But the point really is that we shouldn't create a communication product without a plan of how that product fits into a process, because communication is not a product, it's a process. And in that way, we need to have a communication plan, a strategy. And that strategy is about how to reach out, to engage, to entertain, and to motivate change. And that's particularly critical. Myth 4 really is this notion that the communication is really this one-way traffic of information from the expert to the non-expert, from the risk manager to the risk authorities to the at-risk publics. And as Sendai has demonstrated, really, we need this much more people-centered approach. So rather than scientists just really talking to the local authorities and then the local authorities talking to the publics, instead there's interaction and communication back and forth with local authorities, but more importantly is between scientific advisors and the public. So the multiple arrows on there means that that's a much more complicated way to communicate. And the two levels of conversations that's critical everywhere, and particularly critical in tomorrow's cities, is to develop conversations amongst those at risk, the communities at risk. So that is promoting informed conversations at the household level, within families and communities to help generate and motivate action. And then there's the informed conversation that needs to happen between those communities and publics and the actual decision makers. And that's about governance and about trust. And in that element, I think scientists can be these really strong bridges then between the community and the authority. And that's an important role and responsibility that we have. And again, the key is making sure that as scientists then, as scientific advisors, we are in that community, we're understanding that public, we're having discussions with them, thinking about what it is that they need, that they can generate some communications that then carry that through. So the answer in this instance is we need to start having these risk conversations with and in the community. And the point here is that if scientists are not willing to do that, then someone else is going to fill that vacuum. Someone else is going to be in there talking to the community about those risks, and they may not be as trusted or as expert as we are, and as a result, the things that they're saying we may not agree with, we may not like. So if that is the case, then we have a responsibility to be in there driving those conversations. And so this is the final slide really that tries to put that perspective, that strategy into view really. It's along the horizontal axis, you see to what extent is the public actually involved in the communications, from low on the left to high on the right? And then on the vertical axis, are we interested in communicating complex technical issues, knowledge, or actually are we communicating up the top solutions to everyday problems that people have, so applied science? Most science communications, technical communications sit in the bottom left corner, what I call their make and sell. We make science, we make scientific reports, we create them. The public haven't asked for them necessarily. We create these things and we sell them to the subject, to the public. We sell them out the door with interesting stories and imagery, and we try to wrap them up. And that's really about how to be a better communicator of our technical expertise. And it's really important. It's the first step. But the second step, I think, is a more sophisticated knowledge of who our audience is, sensing the public, sensing the community, understanding the science of who they are and what they're interested in and what platforms they listen to and how they process information, and responding to that with much more effective messaging. But I think there's a domain, a communication domain, even beyond that, and that is what I've referred to as guide and co-create. The guide part reflects our scientific expertise. We have a sense of where we're going. What is the direction of travel in terms of the risk threats that are there and how we should deal with them? But also we have a recognition that unless we're going to work with the communities in partnership with them, co-create the solutions, then those publics are not going to take the action that we're expecting them to take. And that co-production phase, co-design, co-production, requires a very different skill set to the ones that sit in the make and sell or the sense and respond domains. It requires us to be truly interdisciplinary. So Tomorrow City, working from seismologists and the hazard specialists through engineers, across into social scientists and media professionals. It requires us to be participatory, genuinely bringing in, inviting in voices from different places, non-technical lay voices, the community voices, etc., alongside expert voices, and being reflexive, thinking genuinely about, is this the right approach? Are we doing it the right way? Ethical and moral questions, really, about the work that we're doing. And driving through that, from make and sell through sense and respond to guide and co-create, is an ever stronger sense of purpose, a motivating, enduring goal. And that purpose within the Tomorrow Cities project is there. It's reducing disaster risk for the poor in tomorrow's cities. So it's really important that our communications follow that strong sense of purpose within the overall project. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for listening.